perhaps the most effective way to present my research to you would be to play you some examples of my music, but I didn't think that would be appropriate for this forum. So instead today I want to speak about some of the background ideas behind my music. And for this I will dip into a scientific area that's outside of my area of expertise, quite aware that I am on thin ice, and I both beg your patience and indulgence and suggest that this may be an example of a fertile garden where art and science can meet. About 6 years ago, I was struck by this conundrum. I think that what I am attempting when I create a piece of music and present it is to stimulate an emotional reaction in another person. But I had no clear idea of what an emotion is, beyond the imprecise general associations surrounding the world and surrounding that word in popular culture. I wondered if scientists have thought about this, and if so, if there was something I might learn from them that could help me understand music more deeply and possibly contribute insights into helping me compose music more effectively. Poking around, before long, I discovered the research of Jaak Panksepp, the founder of an entire branch of neuroscience dedicated to understanding the neurobiology of our emotions, and this branch of neuroscience is called affective neuroscience. I've been delving into affective neuroscience now for several years, and the basic concepts have changed and added significantly to my artistic practice, my teaching, and my outlook on life in general. It has provided an answer to my initial question as well, which is, what is an emotion? Affective neuroscientists have concluded that emotions are ancient neurobiological systems that provide nonverbal means for creatures to appraise their milieu and decide how to respond most effectively to the spectrum of environmental situations that they encounter. To date, 7 distinct so-called primary process emotional systems have been mapped and differentiated. These correspond to 7 distinct emotions, and we share these with all mammals and most birds. We are born with these, and they form a base platform upon which our entire sense of the world and our place in it, from emotional connections to abstract analysis, is built. Indeed, they are the very source of our sense of meaning. In the affective neuroscience model of cognition, these primary process emotions sit underneath and give meaning and context to the abstract functions of our more recently evolved neocortex, the place that helps us do math and do all that fancy stuff. This is of potentially enormous value to composers and raises numerous questions. To begin with, what are the 7 emotions? Traditional psychology recognizes dozens of emotions, so many that they become meaningless to a composer, but 7, that's something one can work with. Here is an impossibly truncated description of the 7. Number 1, seeking. This is an emotion called seeking, a curiosity, intense curiosity filled with our need to explore the world. Second, fear. This allows us to sense when we are in danger. Rage allows us to react to that danger. Grief, also known as separation distress. If a baby of any mammalian species is removed from its nurturing social group, it will suffer and possibly die. As adults, this is expressed in our need to be accepted and respected by the social groupings that we belong to or aspire to belong to. Each of us, every waking moment when we are with others, is unconsciously scanning for signs of our acceptance and our social standing with regard to the others in the group. We are all fragile in this regard, and rejection or the fear of rejection by a valued social group generates the most extreme feelings of grief and depression and can lead to extreme and violent reactions. This revelation has helped me to understand how I am feeling when I am in a group with other people, and also how each of them is feeling with regard to me and everyone around them. It explains the fear we have of speaking publicly, massive opportunity for rejection. Realizing that my own social discomfort is something that is shared by everybody has been important in helping me to find ways of releasing my own anxiety, as well as, through discussion, helping others around me recognize and release theirs, and thus create a shared experience that is much more compassionate and positive. This is especially useful in a classroom seminar setting, and something that has become very important in my daily practice as a teacher. The dark side of this is our tendency to form exclusive groups that dismiss and dehumanize non-members. This leads us into wars and generates stressful confrontations throughout every layer of our culture. So what types of music promote social boundaries? Do all types of music? National anthems? Country music? Rap music? Rave music? What about classical music? So the next on the list is care, and it's also compassion. And the root of this is a mother's hardwired compulsion to take care of her children. This is also shared by men. Next, lust. So sexual excitement. Play. We must play music. We play music, we play sports. We have a hardwired need to play. So with these 7 powerful primary process emotions in mind, what questions arise concerning music and composition? Here are some examples. Are there existing pieces of music that can be shown to be intrinsic, objective exemplars of any of these in specific ways that can be concretely established? To what extent are there concrete physiological responses that can be predictably and universally stimulated by specific external stimuli? For example, the startle response. If we are surprised with a sudden, sharp, loud sound, we will jump involuntarily. This is to allow us to leap literally into action in the event that we are being attacked. Specifically with regard to music, are there certain types of sounds, dynamic changes, decibel levels, timbres, gestures, tempos, rhythms that have universal intrinsic emotional meaning to us? Next, what is the neurophysiological difference, for example, between music that is designed for dancing and music that is designed for listening? Is it actually possible to have dance music that is an expression of grief, or of fear, or of anger? Can a study of the functioning and metabolic outcomes of being in the thrall of these emotional states yield suggestions for best practices? What types of emotional mixtures do we need as a culture? How, in a concrete neurophysiological sense, does music generate meaning? What are the neural trajectories and pathways? What are the steps along the way? Which parts of the brain are actively present in the experience of listening to music? How does meaning become emotional? Is meaning intrinsically emotional? I would like to find ways of exploring these questions. How can we accomplish this? Well, possibly by forming collaborative relationships between neuroscientists and composers. Possibly by creating a research agenda established at the university level that recognizes the value of using music as a way of studying cognitive and affective systems, and conversely studying cognitive and affective systems as a way of revealing insights into how music might be more effectively performed and created. In general, we could do this by instilling creative artistic practice into the degree trajectories of the sciences and the social sciences, and by instilling science into the trajectories of artists. To effectively accomplish any of this, the attitude needs to be cultivated that the arts and sciences are opposite sides of the same coin, that they complement and complete each other. That learning to see the world through an artistic perspective has the propensity to offer scientists new ways to address their problems, and for artists, being able to access a scientific view of their practice can give them a perspective which will allow them to see it in new and unexamined and surprising ways. What types of questions can be asked from an artistic perspective that can't be asked from a scientific perspective, and vice versa? How can we learn to value both? For example, a couple of weeks ago, I was introducing a piece of mine at the University of North Texas, and I described the need for the audience to imagine themselves as being sea turtles and finding themselves in a kelp forest at dawn as a way to understand the piece of music that they were about to listen to. Now, this could not in any way be considered rigorous scientific thinking, and there's no way that they could try to answer that question with any sort of scientific hypothesis. But imagining themselves as a sea turtle in an aqueous environment could connect and stimulate in surprising ways with other questions that they might be pursuing, either consciously or unconsciously. And from the feedback I received, the audience seemed to really enjoy the challenge. The pursuit of knowledge is inherently a haphazard process, a crooked road. In the words of William Blake, quote, "Straight roads make improvement, but crooked roads without improvement are the roads of genius." So what I want to propose here is that we build some infrastructure here at the university that will give us some sort of guarantee that we find ourselves often on winding pathways, crooked roads, and in unexplored jungles that we need to find our way out of. In the immediate future, I am planning an event in the spring of 2017 with funding from a presidential leadership grant to bring Jaak Panksepp, the guy I mentioned earlier, here to our campus, where he will deliver a presentation on affective neuroscience focusing on the 7 primary process emotions and a correlation with music. And along with that, I am composing a work of music that will seek to give some sort of empirical exploration to some of these underlying principles. And this will be performed by my colleagues in the School of Music. The dates are March 23rd to the 25th, 2017. We are in the process of collaborating with Arts Alive to make this a university-wide and hopefully an annual event where art and science are celebrated together. In conclusion, I speak here as a composer looking at science from the perspective of the arts, with the hope of stimulating an ongoing conversation. I realize that among you are esteemed colleagues whose core expertise is psychology and neuroscience, and I apologize for my naivete. I don't claim expertise, but I am stepping into these perfumed waters where the arts and the sciences swirl together, challenging the perspectives of both with the hope of uncovering fresh means for exploring our existence. Thank you.
That was amazing precision with 15 seconds.
I told you it was going to be 15 seconds.
That is a skilled composer. So we have a chance for some questions, though, for our speaker, John.
Really engaging talk, thanks. Does this exploration potentially anticipate new ethical questions for music? I mean, there are approaches in neuroscience that sort of link rejection emotion with the same activity of the brain as when you break your leg. And so if you're playing music that is eliciting that emotional response, does that lead us into a new area of ethics as it relates to art, music, and neuroscience?
Possibly. I think when we poke around at science from an artistic perspective and vice versa, we're bound to uncover surprises that lead us to think about things in ways which we couldn't have possibly even considered before. So I think this upends a lot of the ideas that certainly musicians have usually used to think about and analyze music. And yeah, I mean, who knows? I would hope so. Thank you. That's great feedback. Yeah.
I'm intrigued by the overlap and also the distinctiveness of the affective neuroscientific view of the primary emotions versus the social psychological and communicative view of the primary emotions. So
I'm not even aware of that. So
yeah,
I'm sure there is.
So it also identifies between 6 and 8 primary emotions, okay. and I'm missing at least one, I think, but fear, surprise, contempt, anger, joy or happiness, and sadness. And so it seems like you have some overlap with fear, anger, and sadness, but where are surprise, joy, and contempt?
That would be a question for Jaak Panksepp, but notice that happy and sad and love are not part of the 3 primary process emotions. And I think that he would say that there are different types of joy and different types of sadness, and that the 7 primary process emotions that they have delineated produce different aspects of both of those. You know, the thing that was a revelation for me, I started dealing with neuroscientists about 10 years ago at the Neuroscience Institute with Gerald Edelman and some of the people out there before they folded. And I walked away there with a revelation before I had sort of a romantic idea of what goes on between our ears based on my Catholic upbringing and Jung and Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and some of those people. And meeting with the neuroscientists, they were trying to form a hard scientific way of thinking about who we are, about how our brain functions. It was very clear. It was what can we measure? What can we actually see? What kind of neural circuitry can we uncover? And what does that show us about how we're doing, what we're doing? And so these 7 primary process emotions, I didn't have time to go into it in the talk, are actually 7 distinctive neural trajectories and neural pathways that can be mapped. And so that's what gives that's the source of these particular categories that they've come up with, as opposed to the social scientific one, which is more based on studying behavior, I would guess.
Behavior and cognitive appraisal.
Okay, but not measuring what's going on synaptically. Again, I'm way out of my depths here, so. I don't want to pretend that I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a composer.
So a question maybe more directly related to that. Are there areas of music that you can connect, like sort of physically understand how it's related to those neural trajectories? Or connect to a particular emotion and sense like the connection between the physical and the music of it.
Well, that's an area of great research that needs to be done. There's a certain subjective aspect about how we understand music that we'll never get away from, but and that is very interesting and complicated. But there are certain things you could say, like for example.
It's a very personal question. Personally, when you think about listening to a piece of music, do you sense a tight connection with what you're learning from the research?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, walking around in the world and just in general and sort of thinking about the spectrum of these 7 different primary process emotions as I have been over the last several years, it seems to account for just about everything I encounter. I mean, all of the, of course, we have all these other various emotions, but, rejection covers a lot of stuff. There's a lot of versions of that out there. And anger covers a lot of stuff. It's kind of great that, that there's not 50 of them you have to think about if you're trying to figure out what's going on. So, I find myself easily being able to relate to these things all the time. Whether or not you can say, and I think it would be simplistic, and I don't mean to say that, like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is about a certain emotion. That would be simplistic. I mean, things, a complicated piece of music like that generates a whole spectrum of emotions that are scintillating and flying around from second to second as we listen to it, and it's highly personal.
But Joe, say Chopin's Funeral March.
Yes. Okay.
Is about very specific.
Now we're talking about something.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Well, and this I was saying about like with the startle response.
Yes.
We all know what the startle response is. Well, there's pieces of music that invoke the startle response. The 1812 overture. You've got these things. Well, suddenly, like, bang! This surprisingly loud bang. So composers have been playing with this for quite a while. It goes all the way from rock and roll through Beethoven and everywhere in between. They didn't call it the startle response, but they knew if they surprised with a big loud bang, they could get the audience's attention, and everyone would wake up and start paying attention to what they were doing. So I think, similarly with the Chopin Funeral March, there could be something very well that we can study about a very slow. Do you know all this? Bum bum ba bum bum ba bum bum bum. It's very slow. It's very deliberate. And so there could be something about the presentation of information to us in a systematic and periodic manner at this particular tempo, at this particular, with this particular spectrum of sounds that causes us to somehow feel a connection with grief and sadness and this feeling of being left by somebody. Could be. And that's something we can study. I just need some neuroscientists who want to play with me with this regard for it to happen.
We've got a room filled with them
Yep.
right now.
All right. Sorry.
So we're going to move